In this video, we're going to be solving quadratic equations by using square roots. Let's recall some important information before we get started. Remember that the number of solutions depends on how many times our graph crosses the x-axis. If it crosses twice, there are two real solutions. If it simply touches it, there's one real solution, and if it doesn't touch it or cross it, then there are no real solutions. Also recall that when we are simplifying radicals, we can split apart quotients and simplify from there. So let's talk about solutions of x squared equals d. When d is positive, that's what that means. Greater than 0 means positive. So when d is positive, then that tells us that our x squared is going to be equal to our d. And it's going to have two real solutions at x equals plus or minus the square root of d. Now, when d is equal to 0, then that tells us that our x squared equals d has one real solution at x equals 0. And when d is less than 0 or negative, that tells us that our x squared equals d has no real solutions. So let's look at our first example. Here we have 3x squared minus 27 equals 0. So here's our x squared. So we're going to begin by adding 27 to both sides, which is going to give us a 3x squared equals 27. Then we'll divide both sides by 3 to get the x squared by itself. And from there, we'll square root both sides, and that's going to give us an x equals a 3 and x equals a negative 3. So you can write it this way, or you can write x equals plus or minus 3. Either way is going to be the correct answer. So notice that when we got to this point and our x squared was equal to our d, and our d was a positive number, then we have two real solutions. Let's take a look at letter B. Here we have negative 5x squared plus 11 equals 16. So we'll begin by subtracting 11 from both sides, which gives us a negative 5x squared equals 5. From here, we'll divide by negative 5, which gives us x squared equals negative 1. Now here is our x squared, and here our d is a negative number. So this should give us no real solution because it was a negative. So if we carry on with our square rooting, this is going to come down to an x, but you can't have a negative inside of a square root. And so we're going to stop here, and this is going to give us no real solution as our final answer. Let's do another problem. It's a little bit more complex. So we're going to go ahead and say our x minus 1 is like our d, or it's like our x. It's what we're getting by itself. So you could almost say, let's come back here up to the top. So you could say that it's like happy face equals, so happy face squared equals d. So it doesn't have to just be an x. It can be anything squared set equal to a number. So in this case, if we were to say that this was our happy face squared, right, like what we were just using, and then set that equal to the 25, we notice that our 25 is positive, so we should have two real answers here. So what we're going to do in order to solve this problem is we are going to square root both sides, and we can do that because the x minus 1 is by itself. Like when we looked at it this way as the happy face squared, the happy face was by itself. There were no numbers in the front or in the back of it until the equal sign, of course. So when we square root both sides, that's going to give us an x minus 1 equals, now the square root of 5 is 5, but the square root of 5 is also negative 5. So we have two problems we need to work out here. And again, there's our x minus 1 still. So we're going to add 1 to both sides, and that's going to give us x equals 4. Over here, we'll add 1 to both sides, and that will give us x equals a negative 4. And for some reason, I said 5 plus 1 was a 4, and that's a 6. So we have x equals 6 and x equals negative 4 as our final answer. So if we take a look at letter D, we have 4 times x minus 3, quantity squared, equals 9. So we're going to begin by dividing both sides by 4, because we want to kind of isolate that. So what we're looking at is like 4 times happy face squared equals 9. We want that happy face to be by itself. So we have to divide both sides by 4 first, which is what we're doing. And that's going to allow us to get our happy face by itself. So we have our x minus 3 quantity squared, which is our happy face, equals 9 over 4. Now we're not worried that that's a fraction. We square root both sides. And now we're going to get x minus 3 equals, and this actually breaks down. We can break this down right here as the square root of 9 over the square root of 4, which is a 3 and a 2. But remember, when we take the square root, we're going to have a positive and a negative answer. So we'll have x minus 3 equals 3 over 2, and x minus 3 equals a negative 3 over 2. So again, here's our x minus 3's. And so from here, we will add 3 to both sides, and we're going to use our calculator. And here, that's going to give us a value of 9 over 2 in our calculator, 9 over 2. Then we're going to add 3 to both sides here, and that's going to give us a value of x equals 3 over 2. And so those are going to be our 2 solutions. So now what about approximating the solution using square roots? So in this case, we have our x squared here. And so we're going to add 13 to both sides first. So we're going to have a 4x squared equals a 28. Then we'll divide both sides by 4. Again, here's our x squared, right? Because that's the whole point, is to get that x by itself. So we have x squared equals 7. And then when we take the square root of that, well, you can't take the square root of 7. But we know that we were asked to approximate our solution. And so we know that because our x squared was set equal to a positive 7, that we're going to have 2 real solutions. So we know that x is going to come out to about 2 things, because we're going to have a positive and a negative by taking the square root of 7. So in our calculator, we're going to plug in the square root of 7, and that's going to give us a negative 2.65. So we have a 2.65 and a negative 2.65, and those are going to be our solution. Now for letter B, we have our x squared, so we add 2 to both sides, giving us 5x squared equals 2. So again, here's our x that we're trying to get by itself. So we divide both sides by 5. We have x squared equals 2 over 5. Now notice that here we have our x squared equals 2 over 5. Now because 2 over 5 is a positive number, we know that we're going to have 2 real solutions. 2 real solutions. And so we're going to have x is approximately one thing or the other. And in this case, we can actually write it as x is approximately plus or minus of that number. So we'll square root both sides, and we're going to plug the square root. Let's move our calculator over. So we'll have the square root, let's try that again. The square root of 2 over 5. We'll plug that into our calculator and get a 0.63. So plus or minus 0, well, let's do that in purple, 0.63. and that is going to be our solution. And so that is how you can solve quadratic equations by using square roots.